Hi, my name is Calvin Pierce, and welcome to my Comp 3097 Lab 7. In this lab, we're doing an ionic list with a detail page one said item is clicked on. So with that being said, I'm going to show you how it runs on an emulator first. This is just a Google Pixel 5. However, you can run it on an emulator of your choice. And then we'll get into the code aspect of things. So we start off with our 5 tasks. This is all static data. It's just preloaded up there when you start the app. This is what you will see. And just for simplicity's sake, it'll be the same every time. So what we can do is we can click on task 1, just being a little slow here at the moment, and it'll bring up the task title and the details for the task. This is task 1. We can go back, we can go task 2, so on and so forth for all of them. It's just acting a little slow, so I'm only going to show you the first 2, but that is how it works. So what we have is we have our starter homepage with our routing. We have a service that we named data. We have a task component with a module inside of it. And then we have our view task page as seen below here. So let me show you everything and how it works. I can show you if it wants to load up. Sorry, just being a little slow today. We got our home routing module. This all just comes preloaded in for you. And then here's where we actually get to stuff that we're actually beginning to add. So what we do is we have our home module here. We want to import our task module so we can get our task data, and we remember you got to put in the imports after you import it up there, otherwise it will not stay. And this is our home page. So this is what they see. It is lab 7. As you can see, we have a list. It'll get you every single task from our function getTask, which just returns all of our tasks inside of a list for us here in Ionic. And then we can ignore the CSS and the spec page. I did not change anything on those. Those are just default as they come. And then we can go to our home page, and we are importing our data service and our task. That basically just gets all of our static data that populates the list. And then we have our constructor. We pass through our data service because we want it on the load. And then we get our tasks, and we just return all of our tasks as such. Now I'll show you our data service, which is just a service that stores all of our data. As you can see right here, we have our tasks that we have as importing an interface, and we have an ID on it so that we can, when you click, we can view each individual one. We have a title, which I've named as task 1, and then details. So when you click on the task, this is what provides. We can rename it something else, but for simplicity's sake, I just named them. This is task X, with X being the number. So what we have is we have our tasks, and we're storing them in an array of tasks. And so we have our ID equals 0. And the reason why we have it as 0 is because in arrays and lists, the elements start at 0. So despite it being task 1, the element ID is technically 0. If you have it as ID 1, when you click on task 1, it would show up with task 2. Just a little fun little tidbit, but that is why we start at 0. And then we just have our functions down here. As you remember in our homepage.typescript, we actually called this function getTask, and it just returns all these tasks as listed above. And then finally, we have our getTask by ID, which is our ID right here. Moving on, we can go to our task component. We have our HTML right here. So this is each item inside of our list. As you remember, let me go to our homepage. We have our list, and we have all of our tasks with that getTask function. Well, this is what each item shows in the list. We have our task. We check if it's a task. We want to have a router link that goes to /task and then the ID of said task. And we're just displaying the task title. So that would be task X, with X being the number once again. And then we just have a paragraph tag that says click to view the details. And when you click, it'll show the task details. That just says this is task X, with X being said number. And then we can go on. We can go into our component.typescript for the task. And what you see is we import our task from our data service. And we have our input right there and our on init. And then we're going to want to go to our module.typescript, and we need to import our task component into here. Basically just add it into our imports and our exports. And then we can look into our view task. Our task, this is basically just the broad view of them. Consider the task as the list and the view task as the details page. in sense. So we have our routing module, because if you remember, up at the top of this component one, we have our router link, which takes us to task/ID. So we have our routing module that's automatically created when you generate the page. All these files will be generated for you. And basically all we got to do is implement the page. I believe it might even be implemented for you. And then we have our task module. Everything's kind of implemented for you there. We have our task page. It wants to load up. And it just takes our task title. So once again, that'll just say task X, with X being the task number, and then task details, which would be the details of said task. And then we have our view task page.typescript. And basically what we did is we imported our data service and our task so that we can retrieve all of the information. We have our activated route because we want to know the route. As you remember, we had the router/task/ID. And then we want to say, hey, we want to get this ID. And then the task, we want to say, hey, we want to get up this task by this ID that we got inside of the route. And then we just have our back button that appears at the top of the screen and the top left, and just changes based on what device you are running it on, whether it be Android, Windows, iOS. And then finally, we have to go to our app/routing. So this path will actually be added in as whatever you have the page for right here. As you can see, it is view task. So I'll just give you guys a little visual. This is what it would look like predetermined. It'll automatically add this whole path in for you, but it would be called view task. If you remember, in the component.html for the task, we actually said the router module as task/ID. So what we'll do, I'll just Control Z undo. We have our path as our task slash, and this is just saying it's expecting an ID after the slash as the parameter. And that concludes my Comp 3097 Lab 7. Hope you enjoyed.